Okay, welcome to this short tutorial video in physics, and today we want to discuss volume. Okay, so at the end of this tutorial video you are expected to know in detail what volume is in terms of the definition, the units which we use to record volume, and how to calculate volume of a regular object as well as volume of an irregular object. So to start with, we want to define what volume is. So by definition, volume is simply the amount of space an object can occupy. Okay, so there we go. The amount of space occupied by an object is simply known as volume. So we can measure volume in different units. We have units which can measure volume. You can measure volume in meter cubed. You can measure volume in centimeter cubed. You can measure volume in milliliters, in liters too, and to mention but a few. So these are the different units in which we can measure volume in. So for the sake of the exam, you need to know how these units are related to each other. So okay, so this is a table showing us how the units of volume are related. So we have 1 meter cubed, that is equals to 1 million cubic centimeters, and we have 1 milliliter, which is the same as saying 1 cubic meter. And then there is 1000 cubic meters will equal to 1 milliliter. So we need to know how these units of volume are related to each other. So these are the units in which we can measure volume. Now it's very important to state that for the sake of calculations and according to the syllabus, the SI unit of volume is actually meter cubed. So I'll point number 3 saying SI unit of volume cubed. So this is the SI unit of volume. Now we have different instruments that we can use in order to record the amount of space an object can occupy, which is volumes. The main instrument that we can state in order to record the volume of a substance in physics is actually a measuring cylinder. A measuring cylinder is the most common instrument in physics we use in order to record volume of substance. But you can also use different other units in the lab to record the volume of a substance. So in our notes you find those different instruments such as a pipette, burette, a syringe, and different other units as well. So for now we're going to emphasize that for physics we use a measuring cylinder to record the volume of liquids mostly. So these are the 4 main important points that we've discussed, and now we're going to move on to discuss how we can determine the volume of a liquid and the volume of a solid. Okay, so now we want to discuss a physical quantity that is known as volume, and for the definition we have definition here that says the volume of a substance is simply the amount of space occupied by that substance. So the amount of space the object can occupy, or it is occupied by that object, substance. So it's simply the amount of space occupied by an object. So we have different units in which we can measure volume. So we have units known as meter cubed, we have units known as cubic meter, centimeter cubed if you like, and we have units known as milliliters, and then we have units known as liters. The relationship amongst these units of volume is right here for us, and where we can say 1 meter cubed is the same as saying 1 million cubic centimeters. And then we have 1 milliliter, which is the same as saying 1 cubic centimeters. So here it's very important to emphasize that most of the instruments in our labs, we actually the graduations are in milliliters. So it's very important to understand that just 1 milliliter is equivalent to 1 cubic centimeters. Now we have 1000 cubic centimeters, which will be equivalent to a liter. So 1 liter is the same as saying 1000 cubic centimeters. For the fact that we have different units in which we can determine volume of a substance, for the sake of SI units, standard units like we looked at in our previous videos, we have the SI unit of volume, which is meter cubed. So the SI unit of volume is meter cubed. Now we have different units, different instruments we can use to determine volume of a substance. The main ones in physics that we use to determine the volume of a liquid is simply measuring cylinder. Measuring cylinder is an instrument which you can use to determine the volume of a liquid. Now we are going to move a step further to see how we can determine volume of a solid and volume of a liquid. We are now determining the volume of a solid. Now we need to understand that there are two types of solids. We have what we call irregular solid and an irregular solid. So there are two types of solids, irregular solids as well as an irregular solid. What then is irregular solid? Well, a regular solid is simply a solid that has dimensions that are easy to measure. So an example is a rectangle, a square, a triangular prism, such examples. So here we have a substance with dimensions that are easy to measure with the ruler. So that is called irregular object. So an example of a regular object is simply rectangle like that. So this is a shape that is regular, where the sides are easy to measure using a ruler. So for determining a regular solid, which is an example there which we have, it's very simple because you only apply a formula. And down in the notes you'll find different formulas for different types of regular objects and how we can determine the volume. So the most important thing to know is that the volume of a regular object is simply equals to A times H. So the volume of a regular object is actually equals to A times H. The A is the surface area for that solid, and the H is simply the height for that regular object. So we're going to say here we're talking about the area of the surface for the regular object, and the H is the height. So in order to determine the volume of a regular object, you simply multiply the surface area with the height for that regular object. So down in our notes, like I say, you find different volumes for different types of regular objects. Now, having looked at what regular solids are and how to determine the volume, we now can move on to look at what irregular solids are. Irregular solids are objects that do not have dimensions that can be easily measured with the ruler. So an example of an irregular solid is a stone. Okay? So a stone is irregular because the sides of the stone are not easy to measure with the ruler dimensions. So in order to determine the volume of a stone, we actually use two distinct methods in physics, and this one is using displacement method as well as Eureka can method. So this is what we're going to look at. So the first one is displacement method using a measuring cylinder. The other one is using a Eureka, or an overflow can if you like. So these are the two methods we can determine the volume of an irregular solid, and this is what we're going to look at. Okay, so now we want to determine the volume of a solid, particularly an irregular solid. Like we discussed, like I said earlier on, there are two methods, using displacement method using a measuring cylinder, and using the other one using a Eureka can. So in explaining how to determine the volume of an irregular solid, notes will give a detailed explanation of how to determine the volume of an irregular solid. I'll speak on the main points. So now, in order to determine the volume of an irregular solid, you need the following. So materials used. Well, you need the solid which you are determining the volume for. In this case, we pick on the stone. So you need a small stone that is able to fit into a measuring cylinder that you're going to use. So we also have to use measuring cylinder, and apart from that, you need a very thin string. So a very thin string, and from there you also need some water in a beaker. Okay, so there we go. So these are the materials that you're going to use in order to determine the volume of this stone. So the first thing that you need to do is to pour some water in a measuring cylinder, and the water that you pour in that measuring cylinder, you record the volume right away as V1. So the first step is you get a measuring cylinder and then you add water in it. So the level of water in that measuring cylinder is here, and you record that volume, that water in that measuring cylinder as V1. Then the next thing is you tie a stone to a thin string and gently lower it into measuring cylinder. So get stone. So you get a string, you tie it with the stone which you want to determine the volume for, and dip it into a measuring cylinder. As you dip that stone into the measuring cylinder, the level of water will rise. So the level of water rises, and you determine the volume for that water that has been, the level of water in the measuring cylinder after the stone has been placed there. So that will be determined as V2. So V1 is the volume of water without the stone, and V2 is the volume of water with the stone in it. So in order to determine the volume of this stone, you simply apply the formula. It says V equal to V2 minus V1. So that is the volume that will give you the volume of the stone. Alright, so now determining the volume of an irregular solid using a Eureka can. After looking at determining the volume using a measuring cylinder, now we want to look at how we can determine volume using an Eureka can. So a Eureka can is simply a container with a sprout. So this is a Eureka can. It's just a container with a small sprout, an outlet on it, like that. So how do you use this in order to determine the volume? Therefore, first of all, you need to pour water to this level until it stops dripping there, like that. So you add water in a Eureka can until the water still stops dripping out of it, like that. And you need to make sure that the Eureka can is elevated above the ground, like that. So it's placed on a surface nicely so that it's not moved up and down like that. So it should be placed on a horizontal surface. And once the water stops dripping like that, you get the stone which you want to determine the volume for, and tie it with a string and gently lower it into a Eureka can. But before that, you need to place a measuring cylinder under the sprout. So you're going to put a measuring cylinder. So we are going to call this as our measuring cylinder and our sprout, like that. So you place your measuring cylinder beneath the sprout of a Eureka can, like that, and then you get a stone, then tie it to a string and then lower it into a Eureka can gently. So as you gently lower the stone into a Eureka can, there will be some water that will be collected into the measuring cylinder. So the water displaced into a measuring cylinder, after some time to stop dripping there, meaning the whole lot of the water has been displaced by the stone. So the water that is collected in the measuring cylinder is actually equals to the volume of the stone placed in the Eureka can. So that's how you determine volume using a Eureka can. So you simply read this reading here on a measuring cylinder and it will equal to the volume of the stone. So that's how you determine volume using these two methods. Eureka can, simply a measuring cylinder.